get into resumes, we're going to talk just a little bit about applications. If you joined me last week for the skills identification, we did talk about applications, but I do want to reinforce that here because a lot of people have a question about why do I need to fill out the same information on an application as I do on a resume. In fact, many people will upload their resume into an application process, and it will kind of what we call parse that information from your resume and put it into the appropriate parts on an application, or at least try to. So a lot of people question what's the difference. The difference is an application is a filtering device from the employer standpoint, and a resume is a marketing piece from your standpoint. We still have a lot of the same information on both, but they are treated slightly differently. You would never talk about why you left a position on your resume, but they ask that in an application. An application might not question about something that is not on their job posting, but you think it's a value, so you add it to your resume. So they are slightly different. The other thing I want to point out is just because you put the dates of employment on an application, because it's required, you still need to have them in almost all cases on your resume. Because one of the things I have found that was pretty shocking to me in interviewing is that the person interviewing you in many cases never sees the application. I know that seems silly, but it's the HR department that's looking at the applications. So you assume that you're in an interview and everyone knows what's on your application. They may not. They may only know what they see on your resume. So I've been in situations where I'm interviewing someone, I'm looking at their resume and I'm wondering, why am I interviewing this person? This person doesn't look remotely qualified. And the reason was their application kind of screened them into the interview, and the resume now is what I was looking at to see how qualified they were. Now, every situation is different. I get that. Sometimes it's the same person looking at both. Sometimes it's separate. But remember, your resume needs to stand on its own to promote your skills towards a position. So as far as applications go, make sure that you fill out everything that is asked for. Don't leave anything blank. If some things are not applicable, put that on there. NA or not applicable on. Leaving it blank sometimes will filter you out. Also, if you are applying for government work, like state work or federal work or whatever, they're very, very picky about dates of employment. So where I may say something like, I worked for a company from 2014 through 2016. There are cases when I don't put months on there. And so I say, well, they need 3 years of experience for me to be relevant to this job. I say I worked from 2014 to 2016. That's 2014, 15, 16. That's 3 years. From an HR perspective, that is a year and 2 days, because they look at that and they can only give you credit for what you can prove. So they will give you credit for December 31st of 2014 through January 1st of 2016, which is a year and 2 days, which does not meet the requirement of 3 years of experience. Now, not every employer is like that, but that's just one of the reasons why it's important to get the actual dates of employment so that you can prove what you have. Now, that can be tricky. One of the things that people don't like to do is call a former employer from which they've been let go or from which it ended badly. It's an investment in your career to do that. It's not an easy conversation to have, but call your former employer, ask for dates, your start date and for your end date. Now, in many cases, I've heard people say, well, that employer doesn't exist anymore, or I can't get that information. Okay, you can try. And if you can't, there are other options. Now, that's the easiest method, the cheapest method. Another option is to contact the Social Security Administration. If it was a tax, submitting job, then they will probably have records of that. It does cost money, though, to get a report on that because they have to look a lot of things up. That costs up to $100. So I'd much rather call a former employer and have that difficult conversation. Once you get that information, put it someplace where you never have to look it up again. What I like to do is I put it in a personal data record and I email it to myself, or I store it on Google Drive or OneDrive or some online storage. That way, if my computer crashes, I still have that information. I have those dates of employment. I have the employer name. I have the job title, so I don't have to look that up again. And that's something you can do before you even apply for a job. Get your tools kind of together. I'll be sending as part of the follow-up information today that personal data record that you can use to get that information together. Some people like using spreadsheets. Some people like using just what I call a master resume that has actual data of employment, and then you adjust that for the resume that you send out to each individual employer. But in the end, it's important to read instructions very carefully, fill everything out completely, and keep good records. Also, I'm going to add one other thing to that. Be neat. Most people think that we don't fill out applications by hand anymore. That's not true. There are employers that require you to fill out an application. It's not anywhere near as common as it used to be, but it's still done. So a really good idea would be to get a sample application. Just download some, standard application from the internet. If you do quick Google, you can do them, and then write everything down as neatly as you can. You'll probably have a couple errors. So once you have that first kind of rough draft together, write it down again. The reason is it's much easier to write something down neatly when you're copying it from pre-existing text than when you're thinking off the top of your head. So it's not a bad idea to get one of those sample applications together. Now, every application is different. I do understand that. Some applications today even require you to take part in something like a personality profile, or I know there are some that even have you do a short, what we call a canned interview, which means that there will be a video recording of someone asking questions. You hit answer, and then you give them your response. If you've never done that before, that can freak you out a little bit in the context of filling out an application online. I think United Healthcare does this. So practicing mock interviewing is even part of filling out an application today. By the way, if you ever run across that, they generally give you a couple of attempts when filling out that application to complete that answer. So make sure you read the instructions thoroughly, and don't be afraid to re-record your answer. I've gone through that with several people, and usually the second answer is going to be much better. If your first answer is fine, then just leave it, of course. So we're going to get in now into resumes. So the learning goals for this next 45 minutes is we want to understand the key resume basics, what to include in most resumes. We're going to know the basic resume sections, and you mix and match them and reorder them. We'll know the importance of targeting. If you get nothing else out of today's presentation, I hope you understand the importance of targeting and aren't afraid of it. The reason I say that is I usually get a question in the chat box from someone saying, do you mean that I have to have a resume for every single job I apply for? Because that's what targeting is. It's targeting your resume to the specific needs of employer. I'm going to say yes, but don't be scared by that, because it does not mean you're recreating your resume. It means you're slightly altering it to meet the specific needs of an employer. And we'll talk more about that, but it's not hard. It's hard to get your resume together. Once you have a resume together, slightly altering it is just changing a few words here or there, moving something up or down because if it's more important or less important. It's fairly easy to adjust. We're going to understand the formatting choices and the importance of using the right one for your resume. And some things, have a shelf life. There's some fonts, and that font is the way your text looks. When I started doing this about 20 years ago, we always used a font called Times New Roman, because that was the default font for Microsoft Word, meaning that it was the font or the way the characters looked when you opened up Microsoft Word, and that's what employers expected. By today's standards, in many cases, that looks a little outdated. So there are some certain formatting expectations that employers have. We'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll talk briefly about the importance of sending a cover letter and the basic content to include. And I'm going to give you a little heads up on that. No one wants to write a cover letter. And if you don't, you're going to hear the advice from someone somewhere, somehow, that says you don't have to write a cover letter. I'm going to say I disagree with that. I'm going to say that if they allow you to write a cover letter, you should put the effort in, because it can help separate you from otherwise equally qualified individuals. So before we get too far in this, I do want to acknowledge that you're going to hear different advice on resumes. If you ask two people what their thoughts on resumes, let's say two career force specialists, they're going to have slightly different opinions based on what has been successful for their clients in their regions. And the reason is they are working specifically with employers that have expectations. So they're going to say, hey, for employers in my area, this is what works, or this has been successful for me. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is provide what we call best practices. Overall, what works the best. In the end, you have to be comfortable with whatever tactic you choose. If I tell you that, oh, you brag about yourself and you should be a self-promoter and say all these great things, and you're not comfortable with that, that could come back to bite you. So make sure that whatever you're putting out there is from you. It's spoken in your voice. It's something that you can back up, okay? All right, so here's an acronym to throw in just to give you an overview of what a resume is. It's a review of qualifications, and I like that word review because it's not everything you've ever done professionally. I have looked at resumes that are 16 pages. I once looked at one that was 24 pages. Now, there are reasons and types of resumes that format or that length would speak to, something called a curriculum vitae or maybe a project-based resume. Those are industry-specific, and employers would expect that length. In most cases, employers are looking for a quick, easy-to-access review of qualifications that respond to their needs. And in most cases, that's a 1 to 2 page resume. I used to say a 1-page resume. I don't argue a 2-page resume. I would caution you against anything longer than that unless there's a specific purpose for it. So essential information only. And then it's also skills-based. Employment dates are important. You should have them if you can put them on a resume. If you have, let's say, work history within the last couple of years. If you have extended unemployment, that means something different today than it meant 2 years ago. Employers are very used to seeing people with a year and a half of unemployment. So if you aren't used to that, and if this is something new to you, it might be shocking that, well, how do I hide my huge gap in employment? Employers are saying it. It's not that big a deal as it used to be. If it's 5 years, that's something different, and you're going to have to maybe adjust how you market yourself. But take aside the dates of employment. What employers are really looking for is, what did you do during that time that would benefit what I need you to do for me? So it's all about skills. Once you get the technical parts about it, the formatting down and the names and dates of employment, you really need to focus on the skills. And we'll talk quite a bit about this. When I say unique, I don't mean it looks unique. I don't think it should be boring, but it doesn't have to wow them with, oh, there's colors and there's pictures. That usually is inappropriate in most resumes. By unique, I mean it's your story. No one has your exact experience. So when you tell me about specific stories about your successes, I have not heard them before. What I have heard before is the information that comes on a lot of resume templates that people use. I mean, you could go online and find a specific template to your industry that speaks to maybe nursing or welding. And it's very easy to say, well, yeah, I kind of did that. And, I could go with that. And it might even be true. The problem is, as an employer, I've seen it before because other people have done the same thing. So tell me your unique story so I remember you and I can set you aside from other people who didn't put that effort in. Now, that's the hardest thing we do in resumes. Speak specifically about our skills and accomplishments. But it's the most important thing we do because it's what separates us from other qualified candidates. I did mention that it is a marketing piece. That's the difference between a resume and an application. So it's all about you. Some of us are not comfortable tooting our own horn. This is your chance to do that. Of course, you can go overboard with that. Make sure that when you're saying something that you did, that you actually did it. Don't take credit for something that you were part of a team that accomplished or that someone else, of course. People do get fired daily throughout this state because they lied on their resume. I've seen it come back to haunt someone 10 years after because they misrepresented themselves on their resume. when they applied for a promotion in the company, they went back and checked the original application, the original resume, and they found out that something was misrepresented, and they were released that day. That's unfortunate. It happened to me. I mean, not that I misrepresented myself, but my HR department in a previous position checked everyone's resume because they had found that some fraud had happened. And so they went back and went over everyone's resume that worked for that company and with a fine-tooth comb. And I was a little scared, I have to admit, because I don't remember what I put on my resume that 7 years ago or whenever I had originally started working for them. So make sure that you can back up anything you say. If you can't get exact dates of employment, err on the side of caution, okay? And then the only way you're going to know if it's effective is if it starts getting you interviews. Not every resume leads to an interview, but if you're applying for job after job after job and you're not getting an interview, then your resume is not marketing you in the right way. Sometimes that's because you're applying for jobs you're not qualified for. But if you think I'm qualified for this job and I'm not getting an interview, there's a lot of aspects to that. There's networking, there's timeliness, there's all sorts of different things. But my take has always been, if it's not working, adjust it, change it, see what works. And then specific, meaning that it's targeted to each and every job. I look at the job posting. I look at the words they use to describe the skills I have. I use that term over and over again. If they say that they want someone who is a facilitator, and I myself to be a trainer, for that employer, I am now a facilitator because that is a synonymous word. It's a synonym in most cases. Now, you have to be able to truthfully say that I could do what you need me to do. I'm perfectly comfortable with using their terms to describe that, though. That's important because many resumes from employers, when resumes look at your employers, they're put through something called an applicant tracking system, an ATS. And what that'll do is it'll look for keywords in a resume or application that match what they're looking for, usually off the job posting. If you don't use the right words, they're not going to be able to understand how your skills transfer to their needs. If they don't use an applicant tracking system, it's a human being looking for certain keywords. That you know Microsoft Office and they're looking for access to PowerPoint, they may not immediately get that they're the same thing, or they may not assume they're the same thing. So always speak to the direct needs of the employer by being specific. Before we move on, I'll make sure, Gina, are there any questions we need to get to before we move on to the next topic?
Yep, I have a couple for you. Two of them from Donna and Remy, both are regarding the dates of employment on a resume. You had indicated earlier that you should always put the dates on. Both those individuals were wondering if you worked a long period of time, is it okay to leave the specific date off? And Remy asked, is it okay to write 20 years of experience on a resume?
Okay, there's a couple things we got to unpack there. First off is the example I gave of very specific dates of employment was for state employment, because that is what I call specific knowledge. I have a knowledge of what that employer requires. So no matter what anyone tells you on a resume, specific knowledge always trumps that. You always speak to the needs of the employer. Now, in most cases, if I've worked at a company for 5 years, I'm perfectly fine putting just the years. If it's shorter term employment, I'll put the month and year, but be consistent. You don't want to go from one format to another format to another format. As far as 20 years, you've got to be a little careful about that. I usually say go back 10 to 15 years of employment. Now I have, 20, 30, well, gosh, no, yeah, over 30 years of employment. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that employers don't need to know that, because as soon as you start going past 20 years, they start to wonder, maybe how close am I to retirement? I am starting to wonder how close I am to retirement. That's kind of a cool thing. But employers should never wonder that. That's why I only put my job history 10 to 15 years. Now, if you've worked for a company for 20 years, you might ask, well, how do I do that? Couple things. Very few people have had the same exact job title with the same exact employer for that time period. Now, I totally get there are some people who have, And that's a perfect opportunity to reach out to your career force specialist at the location nearest you and figure out a way to do that. One of the things I'm going to be sending you today or tomorrow is a template on how you deal with long-term employment with one employer. That's a good thing. That shows longevity, that shows that you've been valuable, but usually it also shows that you've been promoted within that position. So I've worked for the state for 10 years, and in that 10 years I've worked here, I've had 3 different jobs. So I can break that up however I want. I don't have to say work for the state for 10 years. I can say I work in this position and cut it off at whatever position benefits me. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways you can do that. But one of the things I do want to mention now, and I'll mention it again at the end of today, if you would like a resume review, we'll be sending a locator and actually all 50 contact information. You can send your resume to your local career force location and request a resume review. Please don't just say, here's my resume, get back to me. Develop that relationship. Why Gina and I aren't taking your resumes is 1, there's 200 people here today, and I don't want to do that to Gina or myself, but 2, I live in Twig, Minnesota. There are 3 employers in Twig, Minnesota. Now, of course, Duluth and the surrounding area make that a little larger employer base, but I don't know employers in your area. We want to make sure that you're developing that local connection, which can lead to mock interviews, which can lead to maybe some labor market analysis, maybe helping you get some assessments going. It's really important to do it locally. All right, Gina, it looks like there's one more question. You're on mute.
Let's see how many times we'll say that. A photo on your resume, is that appropriate?
So you do see this a lot on some things that you might look up online. And this is where I'll give this as my opinion, and then Gina, you can let me know what your thoughts are. I think that's more of a West Coast type of LinkedIn type of thing that people see. I do not recommend putting your picture on your resume. Now, if I were an actor or I was a media consultant or whatever, on-air talent, I may very well do that. Again, specific knowledge of an industry trumps anything I'm going to say. But in most cases, all I want them to know about me, what I have as far as skills to offer the position. I don't need them to know anything else, so I leave the picture off. Gina, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, I agree. That's a place for LinkedIn, and I could talk hours about LinkedIn photos. One last question for you. Individual has been at the same job for almost 30 years and lost their job, now 63. Any recommendations on how you would work a resume with one really long-term job?
Yeah, so again, that's a very specific question. There's a lot of variables to that. But one of the things I'll be sending, I did mention this a little bit, but is a long-term employment example. And it's got it broken down a couple different ways. There are many, many different ways that could be formatted based on, if you were promoted, if the company changed names even. So my dad worked at a company for 45 years in the same building, but he had many different job titles during that time. And also the company had a hostile takeover and it was bought out and he had to apply for his job and it was a company or whatever. So he could say this 15 years was for this company and be telling the absolute truth, but only being given 15 minutes or 15 years of employment. Now, there is something to be said that we don't want to promote ourselves as, a 20-year-old when we're in our 60s, because there's a little shock value that comes into that. You get into the interview and all of a sudden there's someone like me, and they were expecting someone in their 20s. It's okay to show that you have experience. I'm not saying being at any age is bad. It's certainly not. But the skills are what you need to promote, nothing else. And going back 15 years is usually the best. In that case of 30 years, again, reach out to your local career force location to develop a specific strategy. All right, we're gonna jump in. We won't be able to get to all questions as they come in, but we'll stop one more time before the end of the presentation. Then we'll catch all the questions that we haven't gotten to at that point. So resume basics, you want to keep it brief. This is a preview of coming attractions. We want to develop interest, not questions. So the idea is we don't want them to say, well, gosh, I don't understand if this happened or what happened there and what's this huge gap. Those are questions. You can't answer questions on a resume, but you can develop interest. So you don't have to give them everything. Think of it as like a movie trailer. You know, movie trailers are short and they give you the really good stuff so that you want to watch the whole movie. If they give you the whole movie, you may not invest enough time to find the value there. And that's the mistake people make about giving too much information or unrelated information. So keep it brief. 1 to 2 pages is usually the goal there. And ultimately, a resume doesn't get you a job. An interview gets you a job. A resume gets you an interview. So it's a step-by-step process. You don't have to give them everything, just enough to create enough interest to get you into an interview. So I'm going to show you something in here. What you're looking at is an image that comes from ladders.com. It shows what they call the heat from a recruiter's eyeballs. They did a video of where a recruiter was looking on a resume. And what you're going to find here is on the left are dense chunks of text and wide margins. So I don't know if you can see my pointer here, but you see how densely packed this is. Now, be aware, you can't read this. It's too small. That's not the intent here. The intent is to see the format, which is the first thing you notice on anything. If you buy a car, you don't understand the gas mileage or the safety rating. The first thing you look at is, what does it look like? How does it make me feel? This, to me, is overwhelming because it's really hard to jump into any one section. It's too densely packed. And then they densely pack it, but then they waste all this, what we call white space, in the margins. And many of the templates you see out there will do this by kind of going over and over and over for like bulleting or blocking. And it ends up where you have 2 inches of wasted space here. Now, on the other side of that, you can use too narrow of margins, and that's going to create the impression of something being too densely packed also. But on here, notice that they looked a little bit up here, a little here. I don't know why they were looking in the margin here, but they never got to the bottom. And the reason is they lost interest. You've got about 17 seconds to create interest from an HR person or whoever's reviewing your resume. If you have sections, notice that the education section is clearly identified. I can even read that if I squint. That's where the heat was, because evidently for this employer, they needed to know what the education qualifications were. So they were able to jump to it very easily. I couldn't even find it here. This kind of bleeds off the page. It might be on the second page. This is a well-formatted resume that's easily accessible to the human eye. There are bolded sections that you can jump to. It's well spaced. Something to think about. So when we talk about make it scannable, I don't mean, this used to mean something different. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would say you're submitting a paper copy of your resume and they're putting it into a scanner and they're doing something called optical character recognition, OCR, which is trying to digitize your resume so that a computer can look through it and look for the keywords. That doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. In fact, it very rarely happens. But you still need to make your resume scannable by the human eye. It needs to be able to be quickly identified in areas of importance. So we use bold or capital letters to highlight information. I think it's a mistake to use larger text or even italicizing sometimes. I'm not saying you can't use italicize, but the busier your formatting is, the less accessible or scannable it is. And that seems like it's almost, well, the whole idea of bolding and italicizing, capitalizing, and making larger fonts is to make it easily, scannable so they can jump to it. It becomes overwhelming. So format shouldn't detract from your resume. It should enhance your resume. And so it's subtle. I usually stay with the same font size on my resume other than my name. My name I put up a little bit. But to make things stand out, I make them capitalized or bold, or sometimes even underline certain sections. I do try to avoid italicizing, underlining entire, a whole bunch of stuff, or bordering things with the table format, lines across the page, text boxes for sure. If you put a text box in your resume, and that means you're inserting a box that you can move around your resume, it kind of floats around your resume. that really can help like overcome some formatting issues sometimes, but it's not scannable, meaning that a a computer program might not be able to pick up the words in that box. Now, I have had a question quite a bit. People will say, well, will the table format, will that prevent a computer from being able to look at the keywords? In almost all cases today, no, it's not an issue. And the reason I'm comfortable saying that is almost all resume templates are in the table format, whether you know it or not, whether you can see it or not. So if you go to Microsoft Word and you go to, you type in resumes, you'll get a whole bunch of pre-made templates. I think every one of them is in the table format. If that prevented employers from seeing the words in those resumes, of course they wouldn't be there. So avoid color, avoid graphics unless you specifically have an industry that requires that, like graphic artist or a artist of any kind. Maybe you're going to have that information in there. But in most cases, you want to stay away from color. Now, you'll see this in a lot of templates. If I were to bring up Word, you'd see all sorts of things that have, here's my Twitter handle and has a Twitter icon, and here's my LinkedIn icon and all that kind of stuff. If you're comfortable with that, you're in an industry you think would require that, maybe. But if you're not someone who actively tweets, if you're not someone who keeps up a LinkedIn account on a daily basis or uses it for networking, be very careful about that. I know it seems boring, but the standard resume templates that I'm going to be sending you, and I'll be sending you a bunch of templates today or tomorrow, usually are the easiest for employers to read and access the information they're looking for. So resumes are a selling tool, so be honest and positive. I've very rarely seen someone go negative on a resume. I've seen them do it on an application. But on a resume, you don't need to explain why you left a previous position. You don't have to talk about how horrible your customers were. It's got to be about positive things that you've done in your career. So focus on accomplishments. And by that, I mean for the results of your skill sets. So you don't want to just say you're good at Excel. Talk about how you used Excel to accomplish a goal. Maybe it was reporting out on grant expenditures. Maybe it was to track customer satisfaction rates. Now that has three different things. You have reporting, you have Excel, and you have happy customers. You're hitting three different skill sets or three different accomplishments in one statement. Make sure that you target each of these to each position. I'm not saying you can't mix and match, but what I like to do is I try to think about, as I talked about last week in the skills identification session, which is available on careerforce.com as a recorded session. Once you've identified your skills, now you figure out which skills are needed for each employer. You can mix and match skill statements between jobs. In fact, I almost always do. But I always consider, are there any additional skills or accomplishments that I should add specifically to this resume for this employer, because it would speak to their needs in a more direct way than it would maybe to some other employers. Now, if overqualification is a question we get quite a bit, and it's a real thing, by the way. If you're overqualified for a job, that means you are not marketing yourself in the correct way. If you have a one-size-fits-all resume, meaning that you have a resume that you use and you send out to all employers, it's going to be viewed differently from each employer. So I always look at my resume through the eyes of the employer. If I wanted to work as, let's say, a customer service specialist with maybe a local agency, I don't want to brag about my managerial experience and my 20 years in the field and all this kind of stuff, because what that's going to say to them is, he's not going to take our orders. He's not going to do it our way. He's going to do it the way he's done it, or he's going to leave as soon as a job with managerial requirements becomes available. The reason employers don't want to hire someone who's overqualified is it rarely works out. It really does. People leave when a job that meets their economic needs becomes available. In many cases, applying for jobs that they're overqualified for because the job they want isn't available. It's happened to me personally, by the way. That's why I'm so adamant about reinforcing this. Now, if you're not in that situation, if maybe there's a job that I don't want to be a manager anymore, I want someone to tell me what to do, and I'm very happy doing that, then speak to the needs of that position and don't talk about the things that don't relate. And that can be tough to do. That can be really tough to do. I'll be sending everyone a guide on dealing with issues of overqualifications. We still have to tell the truth. We can't, say that, during this time I worked at a job that I didn't, or I can't leave out a job because then I'm gonna have a huge gap in employment simply because it's, an overqualification issue. It's something each of us has to look at. But if you are being passed over for jobs you think you're highly qualified for, that could be the issue. And again, that's a great conversation to have one-on-one with a career force specialist. So choose a format. There are 3 basic formats we talk about. There are chronological formats. If you have a lengthy work history within an industry you are still trying to stay in, if you've been, let's say, in sales for the majority of your career and now you want another sales job, a chronological resume is the format you're going to want to use because it shows career advancement. It's very easy for employers to see the relation between the types of jobs you had and the work they want you to do now. Many of us, myself included, have done a lot of different types of jobs. So in those cases, we might use a combination or a skills-based resume, and we'll talk a little bit about them. But once you've chosen a format, think about the top third of your resume as being the most valuable real estate. If the format you choose doesn't allow you to sell the most important stuff on the top third of the resume, you need to change the format in many cases. Now, an example of this would be if you had been in sales for, let's say 12 years, but the last 3 years you've worked in finance. Well, I look at the top third of your resume and I see finance and all these great things you did in finance, and I'm hiring for a sales position, I may not get it. So in that case, you may change the format to meet the requirements of who you're marketing your resume to. When we talk about white space, that's your margins or the separation between text, like maybe a blank line in between sections. If you don't have enough white space, your text becomes very cramped and condensed, and it's very hard to read. Because of that, I don't recommend anything lower than 10-point font as far as the size of your text. I don't go any higher than 12 points. There's not a lot of wiggle room. As far as margins, I recommend anything between 0.8 and 1 inch. I know, again, not a lot of wiggle room, but if you go to 0.5, meaning half an inch, it's not enough white space and it might not even print properly. And then if you go anything larger than an inch, you're really wasting the available space you have to talk about your skills and accomplishments. Now, the other thing is it needs to be error-free. Having a resume review gets an objective set of eyes on it. When you get done with a resume, you're sick of it. I know I am. When I'm done with my resume, I am sick of looking at it because I've been looking at it over and over and over again. I can't objectively look at it with a fresh set of eyes. So obvious mistakes just totally pass me by because I know what I want to say. I know what I mean to say. So I'm going to read it that way. Having someone else look at it, and it always doesn't have to be a career force specialist. It could be a friend. It's a great way, by the way, of bringing your references into your job search. Ask them to do a resume review for you. And then, oh, by the way, would you be okay being a reference for me as I look for the next stage of my career? It brings them more into your job hunt, and they're going to think of maybe some job opportunities for you. So edit, edit, edit. Very, very important. Okay, so we talked about chronological. I'll give you examples of function or skill-based. That's going to have the skills on the top. And in many cases, even now with the functional resumes, we do include just line items for your employment history because employers are really looking for someone with work history. A combination would be a mixture of the two, and you'll see some examples as we go along. Whatever story format you use, it has to be the one that tells your story the best for the employer you're marketing yourself to. Here's an example of a chronological resume. Even though we do have kind of a skills section up here, I consider this a chronological resume because the main idea here is, here's my employment, here's what I did during that employment. Again, very good for consistent work history in the same industry that you're looking to further your career with. A functional resume is mostly skills. So instead of having the headings of jobs, you have the most relevant skills and then examples of accomplishments within those skill sets. Now, of course, these skills are taken right from the job posting. that you're applying for, that you're responding to. So they're going to be different for each employer, even if it's a nursing type of situation, in which case chronological is usually the best. But in some cases, I've even gone skills-based when I have experience within a field, because it was so important for me to have the headings of the skill sets that I chose this, and it has been successful for me. Whatever format you choose, though, make it respond directly to the needs of the employer. So you change the way the wording of the skills they're asking for. Then a combination is a combination of the two. Don't get hung up too much on the terminology. Sometimes it's, half of one, six, what is that? 6 of one, half dozen of the other. That is kind of a combination of a couple of different types of format. As long as it tells your story effectively and it gets you interviews, it's the perfect format for you. So the basic formats of parts of a resume is we have the heading, which is going to be your name, a little bit larger. I usually spell out the state, put your phone number. I used to say put your home number and your cell number. By the way, if you use your cell phone almost exclusively and have a home number like myself, I very seldom check the messages on my home number. So I give my cell number. You don't have to put cell. Just put whatever your main number is. Make sure you have a professional email address, usually at Gmail or Outlook is the best two most professional sounding email domains. Make sure if some combination of your first and last name is usually the best. I know that's taken, but like Art Larson was taken, Arthur Larson was taken, Arthur.C.Larson was available. At Outlook, I was able to get Arthur.Larson because that has less users than Gmail. I was able to get a more specific email account. Just make sure it's not anything that is something about your, let's say, hobbies or whatever, and certainly not something that's unprofessional. Only include your LinkedIn account if it's up to date and accurate and speaks to the industry that you are applying to. So if you have a bartending LinkedIn profile and you're applying to a warehouse position, you might not want to have your LinkedIn because LinkedIn is a profile generally to one industry. You don't want to have LinkedIn so scattered that is everything you've ever done because people don't understand the value that you bring for that. So something to think about. Let's go here. If you're going to put an objective, usually I only put the title, the position I'm applying to, and where I found it. So mechanical engineer position posted on MinnesotaWorks.net or a company website or Indeed. Don't waste time saying objective, looking for a rewarding career in which I can utilize my skills and experience. That doesn't say anything. It's at the top third of your resume. It wastes space. Sometimes you can put a summary that just gives you an overall. Here's the last 10 years of my work history as it relates to your need, kind of just an introduction. You don't have to have a summary in a chronological resume, but sometimes like in a skills-based or functional resume, a summary will kind of set the stage for what they're going to read. And then if you have a chronological resume, you list the position. Usually the position is going to be above where you did it. There are some very specific instances in where the company name is more important than what you did there, but in most cases, what you did there is more important. And then be consistent in your work history format. If you're going to use months and dates, use months and dates. If you're going to use years, use years. Even the space dash space or no space will present a different format, which is noticeable. So just be consistent on however you lay it out. All right, and then you can also, once you get to that point, if you're going for a different option than chronological, what you're going to do is you're going to put it under a skills heading, and then you're still going to have those skill statements, very much like you will put under a chronological resume that is underneath history, but now it's going to be underneath skills headings. The benefit of this is it's not tied to chronology. So if the most important thing you did was 5 years ago, in a chronological resume, it's on the bottom half of the resume. In a skills-based or functional resume, it's at the top because that's the most important thing, and that's the benefit of that. And then usually your education is at the bottom. Not always, but usually. Where it might be at the top if it's the most recent thing you've done and it's the most relevant thing to the industry you're applying to, then it might be at the top. In most cases, it's at the bottom because employers prefer experience in a field versus education in the field in most cases. And because education is usually just it's a requirement. If you have the education, I'll consider you. If you don't, I may not. And because of that, it's just a tick box to be checked off. And if I'm interested in your resume, I'll look for the education. If it's not there, it could be a problem, but it doesn't have to be at the top. I usually leave education dates off if it's longer than 5 years ago. Here's an example of one way to do it. I don't like putting bullets on education because then your bullets kind of trail off the bottom end of the page. I like putting some bold and non-bullet to kind of box in or finalize that page on the resume. All right, we don't have a ton of time to get through things, but maybe we can take one question possibly, Gina, because we got a lot more to get through before we finish up today. Is there any questions we need to get to, Gina? We can maybe take one before we finish up with the material.
Yes, this one comes up quite a bit. Someone commented that objectives on resumes are not being used any. Can you comment on that?
So, I mean, blanket statements like that, even though I may make them and say I don't like them, they are still used by some people. What I'm saying is you're going to use them, make sure that they add value. And how it adds value by putting the objective accounting clerk 1 position posted on county website I-74382. That tells you that when someone looks at the resume, here's exactly why I'm looking at it, and here's where my marketing has been successful. Once a resume is printed off, it's disassociated with that application or that applicant tracking. Putting that on there can help an employer to understand what they're looking and why they're looking at it. And it also gives them feedback on if they maybe invested in an Indeed posting, that's been successful. You don't have to have it, but what I'm saying is if you put a throwaway line like objective, rewarding career with your company, you've wasted that space, and I would definitely take it off. I tend not to have them. I do still see them on a lot of resume templates. I would change the wording. All right, we're going to continue on here. So other resume sections you can add are as needed. Military experience. If you have military experience, I generally do add it. The reason is there is a real thing called veteran preference, and it's something that a lot of employers are looking for. I've worked very closely with the veterans reps in the state of Minnesota, and their employers that call every day saying, I really want to hire a vet for this job. And having that on your resume can get you an interview. They're not going to hire someone who's not qualified for a job, but getting to the interview greatly enhances your chances of getting that job. And sometimes military experience can help. Volunteer experience, I only include that if it has a purpose, if there's a reason to put it on. Like it shows what I was doing during a gap of employment. It shows a skill set that my work history doesn't. There are reasons to put it on. The mistake I've seen people make is they add a lot of volunteer experience that is unrelated because they're very proud of that work. Totally okay to be proud of that, but it can eat up a lot of space on your resume, and it can tell an employer that you overcommit. That might be the impression they get, that, my gosh, you've got a full-time job going volunteering here. You're not going to be able to work weekends or overtime for me. So everything on the resume has to have a reason. Leadership experience, if it's required, certainly put that in various maybe committees you've been in if it's required. But again, it can speak to overqualification if it's not something that they're asking for. Be very careful about professional memberships. If they relate and are not political or divisive, you can certainly add them. Any awards or recognition, don't go back to the beginning of your work history, but if you were Employee of the Year at a company, that to me is something I would keep for quite a while. If you received an award that was fairly impressive, you can keep that on your resume. Sometimes you might leave the date off, but you shouldn't put things on there that were, got the Employee of the Week parking spot in 2008. those are things that you can kind of keep off. And then any training certificates that are relevant, they can back up a skill set. You can seek those out, by the way. It's much better to say I'm a Microsoft certified user as opposed to saying I'm really good at computers. That's an investment in your career. I did that. It cost me $85 for the rest of my life. I will have Microsoft Office Specialist certification. I'll leave the date off now because it's been a while ago, but it validates a skill set I would otherwise just say I have. Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about accomplishment statements, activities. I'm going to be kind of brief on this. There's a huge difference between saying you kept inventory and manage daily inventory of over 1,000 classifications of medical supplies. The idea here is this tells a story. This is a statement that you copied and pasted off a job posting. Don't just repeat what they ask for. Prove what they're requiring. Manage, that's an active verb. 1,000, numbers stand out. Medical supplies, it's within an industry. So instead of called customers, grew client base from 0 to 70 within 2 months by effectively using cold call techniques. How many people like to cold call people? I'm willing to do something other people aren't. I can cold call people and I do it effectively. So fleshing out a skill so it tells a story. You don't write a paragraph. These are just one-line sentences, but it's unique and people will remember them. Like I said, I'm going to ask Gina actually, if you can copy and paste the cover letter content into the chat box. I'll also include this link, but there's a really good website that the state puts out that has samples of cover letters, because we could spend an entire hour and a half on cover letters, but it'll give you some templates, some overall guidance on cover letters. Don't skip this step. I know it's easy to, it's a lot of work, and I'll be honest, employers might not even read it, but I would hate to lose out an opportunity because I didn't do everything I could towards a job. I only apply to jobs I'm interested in. I only apply to jobs that I think I'm qualified for. So I'm not applying for 20 jobs a week. I'm having a focused, well put together marketing piece for jobs that I think I can do and that I want to do. So therefore, I'm writing a cover letter for every job that I apply for if they allow it. So what you put in a cover letter is you state your intent, why you are contacting them, indicate kind of why you're interested, and then you go into further detail, a longer narrative piece that you couldn't do in a resume because it's too densely packed. A cover letter is meant to be read. So you tell a story or two about a specific instance in which you excelled at something they're requiring someone in this position to do. And then you explain how you will follow up. Now, if you're going to follow up, say you're going to follow up, like I'm going to call you next week, make sure you do it. In many cases, people just say, I look forward to talking about my qualifications further in an in-person interview. Always thank them. And if, like I said, if you're going to follow up, make sure you do it, because it's your one and only opportunity to prove that you do what you say you're going to do. So to do a resume review, and we're getting right towards the end of today's tightly packed class, you can visit careerforcemn.com to find the nearest location to you. There's a location finder right there. You just type in your zip code and the distance in which you're willing to travel, and it'll show you the CareerForce locations in that area, and you can get the contact information for those areas, both phone number and email address right there. But I'll also be sending everyone just a nice little PDF that has alphabetically every single site, their phone number, and their email address. By the way, give us a couple of days. We want to make sure we're doing a good job in reviewing your resume, so it's not something that's going to be instant. If you have an interview coming up tomorrow, we can't probably turn it around quick enough to get a job that closes tomorrow. We're probably not going to be able to get that resume by 4:30 on any given day. That's why it's important to do this before you need it, because timeliness is so important in job hunting. Sometimes things fall into your lap and we'll do the best you can, but in most cases, you want to get as much of this done so that you're ready to apply for various jobs. Thank you very much for joining us today. I will be saving a copy of the chat, and I'll address any questions we weren't able to get to. It's a lot of information to get to in a very short period of time. However, I hope this gave you some idea of some tactics to start writing a resume or adjusting your resume. Thank you very much. Gina, thank you very much for being our moderator today. Again, by the end of the day tomorrow, you will receive a ton, it's actually overwhelming amount of follow-up material. Take what you need from that. Also, there will be a recording if you need to slow it down a bit to rewatch this. Gina, I'll let you wrap it up. You're on mute.
I'm just glad my internet's working. Can you clarify, please, where they'll be receiving that? It's email, and I'm assuming the email provided in their Minnesota Works account?
Yeah, so the same email account that I sent you the registration link is where you'll receive the follow-up. Yep, and that should be coming. And it won't come before the end of the day because it takes a while to edit the video and get it uploaded and make sure we're giving you a good product there. But it should be by 4:30 tomorrow. All right, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.